Well, there we go. Hey, everybody. Good morning or good afternoon or whatever. I'm going to share a screen here just so we can look at some stuff.
And don't hesitate to open up the chat screen and ask any questions in the chat box as well.
Definitely. So welcome to episode 14, good old February 2016. My name is Christian Buckley. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer with BZ, and I am an Office Servers and Services MVP, and happy to be here and to get things started. And Naomi, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Naomi Moneypenny. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at ManyWorlds. We have apps such as Streaming It Out Loud and Synexi, which is an expertise and knowledge discovery engine for Yammer and Office 365. And very happy to be here. Happy to be home. Unfortunately, still in the guest house, as you can see from behind me. But I think that Benjamin is no longer limpy.
No, I've removed it.
It's still there. No, I'm still limping a little bit. So my name is Benjamin Niaulin. I work at ShareGate, and I'm still a little bit not able to walk, but it's on the way there, still on the way. Marc Anderson.
Hello, everyone. I'm the chief cook and bottle washer at Simpraxis Consulting in Boston, Mass. And I am still clinging to my SharePoint MVP title, which is a good segue into our first topic, is it not?
Yes, but that's what we're going to be talking about. We're going to kick things off with kind of the state of the SharePoint brand. And I know where this comes from. There's been a number of articles written, and I know a lot of discussion out in the community about what happens to SharePoint and the brand of SharePoint in an Office 365 world. And is it kind of being pushed to the back, or what's actually happening? What can we talk about? We're also going to go through and talk about SharePoint's UI guidance. And as we were kind of putting together last month the topics, Marc, trying to sound really super intelligent, used the phrase cognitive dissonance, which, of course, Naomi eats that kind of statement alive daily, just throws it out, spins it out there. But we're also then going to talk about the role of the CSM and what's happening around Yammer, because that is also kind of news that happened in the last 30 days. And so we're going to hit these one at a time. Let's kick things off with, and I don't know, Ben, if you want to jump in first, the state of the SharePoint brand.
Are you sure? Because I'm going to take the whole hour here. No, I think it's a very interesting topic. And I still get it today, and it's not just SharePoint. We can broaden it after towards everything. But what would happen is, to summarize the question a little bit, we're talking about SharePoint brand. Where is it at right now in terms of the brand itself? Because for a while, as Microsoft did its 3-year release cycles, in between that 3-year release cycle, they started talking a lot about Office 365 and everything in the cloud. And what happened during that time is a lot of people started thinking, well, they're not talking about the SharePoint product anymore. It must be dead. And now that we are finishing that 3-year release cycle, we're going to release a new SharePoint on-premises very soon, in fact. We started talking about SharePoint again, and it's like, oh, SharePoint is alive, when it's just following the regular release cycle. So,
but I think that's part of it. That's only part of it, Ben. Because the other aspect of it is that if we're talking about Office 365, and I think everyone would agree here, is that people generally talk about the individual workloads rather than what's happening inside the system. And so I think since now SharePoint in the cloud is competing with all of these other products, these other workloads, I think that's also impacted people's perceptions of what's happening with SharePoint. So I think you're right.
Yeah.
But I think it's also the noise of the other workloads.
Yeah, no, there's definitely, look, they definitely want to promote the way I explain it usually is to not look at it as competing products. It's not SharePoint Online versus your SharePoint On-Prem. It may have been like that at the beginning where everything was still very confusing. I think even the messaging we were receiving from Microsoft was very confusing for us and people in organizations that weren't necessarily sure about the cloud. But the way I usually go for it is, look, step one, you choose where your SharePoint is going to be. Could be SharePoint Online, could be SharePoint on-premises. That's SharePoint. You look at it as a product. Does it solve your business needs, what you need to build with it? And then step two, there's things that are built with SharePoint, which in Microsoft Office 365 are called experiences. And for the rest of the world and before Office 365, we would call them apps or web apps, right? They're pre-built things that run on SharePoint. like the video portal, like the planner, like many things that are coming out. They're just pre-built SharePoint things, and we just plug them. So where's SharePoint, or what is the state of the brand? I think is an excellent question. I think the first thing I would say, and the first messaging I would I would bring out of that, is to make sure everyone understands that we're not talking about SharePoint leaving, or that, they may talk less maybe about SharePoint, but they promise that no, they're going to talk a lot about SharePoint this year. But it's not because we stopped talking about the SharePoint brand necessarily for a little while how could I say this before I bring it into Marc Anderson there, because waiting impatiently. I think SharePoint arrived to a certain maturity, not that necessarily it's perfect for everything that you need to do, but just like Active Directory did that curve, and now it's just part of it. Everybody knows what Active Directory, they may not build it very well, they may not use it very well, but everyone kind of has or goes with Active Directory these days. And in the cloud, it might be called something else with Azure AD. For me, SharePoint has gotten to that certain level of maturity where it kind of everyone has it. Not everyone necessarily uses it well, but now we're going to that beyond. I'll let Marc Anderson follow through with this.
Oh, great. With a whimper. Well, I think sometime over the last 3 years, while we've been in sort of SharePoint 2013 world, a lot of people started thinking that SharePoint was just going to disappear altogether. I think that was probably never the case. I was starting to believe that it was going to be subsumed into the Office 365 world, and that as a brand, SharePoint would disappear. But of course, what it did, what people find it useful for, would still be there in SharePoint, in Office 365. Now that there's a SharePoint 2016 on-premises release coming out, it's clear that SharePoint as a brand still exists. And I think with Jeff Tepper coming back to Tepper, whichever way he wants to say it, it's up to him. With him coming back to the SharePoint / OneDrive team, I think that brand is actually going to be boosted again. There are things that are going to be supported by the SharePoint engine that are part of Office 365. I think part of this also comes from there's this tendency on the part of Microsoft to push one message at a time. You remember when it was all to the cloud, right? To the cloud, we're all in with the cloud. That was the sentence or two sentences that everyone was saying for a while. Now we're back to, oh yeah, SharePoint still exists. We want to support and encourage SharePoint people to do their thing. So I think Microsoft is getting a little bit better at being able to push multiple marketing messages at the same time, Jeremy. So it's a little bit easier to understand what's going on without having to get distracted by that one message all the time. So I think SharePoint's going to be around for a good long time. I am hanging on to that SharePoint tag on my MVP because I think I don't think it's going anywhere.
So I guess quick perspective on it. I think the SharePoint brand will exist as long as customers want it to. And the reason I say that is because the on-prem, we have to call it on-prem, we have to call that functionality something. And I think a lot of our confusion a couple of years ago was really about the Office 365 suite nav, right, where it got called sites, right? And the SharePoint moniker was gone from the suite nav. And so we were like, well, that's the end of the SharePoint brand. But I do think, to Ben's point, this is moving up the levels of abstraction is the word I'm going to use to explain from the software to a platform, to a bigger platform, to productivity, right? So levels of abstraction, and I think we are moving up that way. And I think all of the different apps that we're seeing as part of that, I do think the Office 365 brand is going to consume all of those different workloads and the individual branding that happens with the applications. I think that's a good strategy by Microsoft because I think the more that they start rolling in functionality that comes from acquisitions, I think it's much easier to talk about here's the features and functionality. If we think about the Acompli acquisition, we think about Wunderlist, we think about all those things coming in. It's really important to be able to roll them very quickly under the Office 365 brand. So I think we will see that. I do think, but SharePoint itself is going to be there as long as customers are willing to pay for an on-prem edition.
I think I agree with you, Naomi. I think B-Frame just voiced what a lot of people are.
That's a rap name, I believe.
Yes, it is. B-Frame. He, she, that person, handle said, I certainly hope it does not disappear. We have a lot of content that we built in SharePoint.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there's an important distinction here. We're talking about the brand, not the functionality.
Mm-hmm.
And we're seeing that the functionality of SharePoint in the guise of Office 365 has been evolving, and other things have been bolting on the sides of it, Delve and things like that aren't SharePoint per se, but exist well with SharePoint. And I think we'll continue to see that happen. Bill Frame.
Bill.
I didn't want to.
Bill. I kind of like the B frame. Yo, B frame.
So SharePoint, what you're using SharePoint for now, I'm going to retire on. I've been saying that publicly. I'm getting old, so I can say that pretty easily. But I don't think I think it's going to be around for a long time. I mean, there's still people running SharePoint 2007, so the marketplace is still around. And
it's not in any shape or form slowing down or dying off. If anything, especially for developers going forward, I think it's just going to grow because of the way it's being tailored to be, or the way they're making SharePoint. Sorry, my French, you know how it is. Can't make perfect English sentences, but the way they're building out SharePoint for the next coming year or two, and from what we've seen under some NDA stuff, I think that if anything, it's a growing product, right? In terms of a brand, not everyone might always call SharePoint, but I think they will nonetheless. I think this year is going to be a big push for people to know. Somebody you may have seen, I did a little infographic wheel. I brought the wheel back for Office 365, and somebody contacted me and told me to remove SharePoint Online and to put Sites instead of SharePoint Online. And I was like, no, that may have been how a lot of people understood it for a while, that the brand SharePoint was going away and that we were going to call it Sites now. But no, it's still SharePoint, and it's going to come back even stronger. And the way to develop on top, or I should say around SharePoint, it's just a story that's growing. And the more developers you have building things for enterprises, for even consumerization, I doubt it, but for anything really, I think for me, it's a growing product, and you can definitely retire on SharePoint, Mark.
Well, remember the pendulum swings in Microsoft marketing too. I mean, Sites started to be the word that everyone was seeing in lots of places, and now you're going to, I think, start seeing SharePoint more. So
right. I was just going to say that Tieper in his keynote in Stockholm in November talked about this point. Explicitly said, look, there's been rumors like that. SharePoint's kind of fading in the background, and so even when I wrote this, I don't know if everybody saw it, out in the chat, I provided a link to a Redmond magazine article that I wrote where I was talking about, based on the messaging that we have today and where some of this confusion comes from, it seems like if we remain on this trajectory that SharePoint, the brand, really has more relevance for the on-premises world than it does for online. And immediately, and I knew that there's stuff that's happening, that Microsoft is working on things, that there's going to be announcements, there's that are forthcoming. Tieper talked about in his keynote that this year, 2016, is going to be, they predicted, the biggest year for SharePoint because of some of what they have coming out. And I think what with some of, again, as Ben mentioned, I mean, there's things that we know and don't know that are NDA. We hear rumors about things, but that SharePoint as a brand is going to be coming more to the forefront. So, but from that brand perspective, I still can see, and I'm okay with SharePoint as a brand in the cloud, where it's going, fading away, and but the capability, I think, as everybody's made this point, is central to how Office 365 runs. I mean, most of the business solutions are either run by SharePoint or Office Graph. So it's not going away. So the things that you've built out, I mean, obviously Microsoft wants to move as many people from the server model to the services, but the things that you've built in SharePoint, are going to not be wasted dollars there, whether you have a hybrid environment, you stay all on-prem, or you move to the cloud. It's Microsoft's job, if they want to convince 100% of customers to move. I think it's pretty simple. They need to go out and build out the capability to enable organizations that have built complex, customized SharePoint environments to make the transition. Not that 100% of that customization needs to move across, but they need to be able to convince those customers to move across. So anyway, I don't, that kind of clouds the issue, I know, but I mean, I'll just, again, fall back on that. What Teeper's talking about doing is building on the SharePoint brand, both on-prem and cloud this year. So I think we're going to see some stuff soon.
I think there's just a couple, 2 points on that too. I think one is that the brand itself, obviously we've made it very clear, we're not talking about the features and functionality. Those things are definitely remaining, and SharePoint will continue to exist even if it was called Sites or anything else, just the brand. But I think it's important inside of Microsoft maybe to play a little bit the brand of SharePoint, just because from a teaming and engineering perspective, we want all of those Office 365 services, whether you're consuming them online or in a hybrid environment, we want those services to all work together. And I think a lot of the tendency is that with product teams, you can have, well, that's SharePoint's problem, that's OneDrive's problem, that's, somebody else's problem, right? And you miss a lot of those integration pieces. So I think that downplaying the SharePoint brand itself is actually maybe a good thing inside of Microsoft. The other point around this is also, is it possible that the SharePoint brand might be limiting in what people would think it could do? So we all know that for internal implementations of SharePoint at different customers, oftentimes we say, don't call your intranet SharePoint, right? Because people won't, look at it again, right? We understand that branding and how important it is internally. And so the question is SharePoint is capable of doing a lot of stuff, right? We're seeing some amazing stuff coming out, as well as SharePoint 2016 and all of the things that it can power. So it really is that platform, it really is that engine, and it's really coming to fruition. Yep. So calling it SharePoint, is that actually limiting? Because our perception is set a certain way. So.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a legacy. I sometimes say in sessions that I do, the SharePoint name is both a blessing and a curse, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, if you've been around a good implementation of SharePoint, you think it's great. If you've been around a bad implementation of SharePoint, which unfortunately there are too many of, then you probably think SharePoint sucks, and that's too bad. But I think you're right. The brand both has its ups and downs.
But I think that if we go back to the state of that SharePoint brand, I think in my opinion, this year is going to be that almost like a change of the logo. It's more speculation, but a boost into the brand, reinventing the SharePoint brand will be the year 2016. And I think it's going to be the time, if they do it well, could be the time where people get back in it. Not that they were going away, but put the confidence back into that SharePoint platform that it needs for people to continue building what they need to build.
So I think Ben and I share this bullishness around that word.
I'm kidding. I was going to say.
Or is it both something?
How that goes. Sorry. All right. So
well, why don't I jump? I'm trying to find the button here. There it is.
The cognitive.
On to our cognitive dissonance.
Oh, yeah. So I removed the phrase here to talk about it, but it's really about the guidance around SharePoint's UI. So to kick off your second topic, and Mark, why don't you
explain it? Yeah.
This one's my fault, so let me explain why I even use the term cognitive dissonance, which does apply here. I actually thought of this as a topic because I saw a post from Vesa Juvonen on Facebook, of all places, where he was talking about some guidance that someone...
So who is this person, for those that don't know?
Yeah, Vesa is an awesome dude who is primarily at the moment in charge of the patterns and practices repo on GitHub. Mm-hmm. So he's really helping the community build community available code that we can reuse and hopefully follow some best practices.
So basically standardize how developers build in terms of SharePoint solutions.
Right. SharePoint and Office 365.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so there's some great stuff out there. If you haven't looked at it, it's on GitHub. It's GitHub/Office PNP, I believe. If you can't find it, I'll I'll search it. So the idea here is that there are a lot of things we can do through the UI in SharePoint that Microsoft has been discouraging us from actually doing. And that, to me, is the cognitive dissonance piece. You know, we're seeing things that we're capable of doing in the UI, and we're actually being told, if you hear the right person say it at the right time and in the right context, that maybe you shouldn't do that. The Design Manager is a great example of that. That's been available in SharePoint 2013 since day one.
Yeah.
And it allows us to customize things like master pages, but the guidance tends to be don't customize master pages these days. So we have this sort of cognitive dissonance. We have things that they're saying, you know, that they've built that actually works really well. The Design Manager is a nice set of functionality, but on another level, they're saying we shouldn't do it. Another thing that this particular post from Vesa was more about, which is saving sites as templates, something that, you know, Ben and I were talking about before the webinar started. You know, we do this all the time. It works great for us. We even, at least I cheat my way over to _layout/SAVETMPL.ASPX when it's not there. And if I can get away with it.
It just rolls off the tongue, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. If I can get away with it, which I think they've shut down on Office 365, I'll save the site as a template even if it's a publishing site, because it just plain works. And everyone says, well, but it doesn't, and you should never do that, except that it's in the UI a lot of the time. I mean, a lot of the time it's on that page. So we see a lot of specific places where we're getting guidance that contradicts what we're able to do in the product, and that's really where the discussion should be, I think, for this.
I think that's where, I mean, I agree with your point, so that's why I find it funny with what I'm about to say, but because I 100% agree. I don't.
Ben has cognitive dissonance.
I have cognitive dissonance. No, it's true. If you shouldn't be using it, then it shouldn't be there, and I 100% agree. I think the challenge for a company like Microsoft compared to smaller products that we can go and find online is that they have an impact on everywhere. There's so many organizations from different industries at a different level using SharePoint. And if they know that now, they realize for whatever X reason that they don't recommend to modify master pages, because when they're going to add a new feature, which they do very frequently, like in Office 365, modifying the document library, removing buttons and adding some, that it has an impact if you change the master page. But how can you as such a large company with so many customers all around the world can just decide that since it's our new guideline to remove the button when there are people in the process of deploying or using it. I think that's one of the challenges for Microsoft often, right? That's why they never just remove a feature. First they deprecate it and then they remove it. It's because the impact is so immense with so many customers. So I agree 100%. If I shouldn't save the site as a template, then it shouldn't be there. How? I mean, it's a good question. It's a good conversation to have.
I think my take on this is looking at the responsibility, where responsibility is and where the balance of that responsibility is. I think if you're a software provider, you're a service provider like Microsoft, you have to give the customer the choice, right, of doing things that might be exceptional to your standard process. So it's kind of, you can have it in any color so long as it's black, right? So long as you have that kind of attitude, right? If you want out of the box and you want to maintain first release, for example, you want the newest functionality, all those things coming out. If you are a large enough company that you can handle the risk and the responsibility of customizing to your specific needs, then presumably you can also handle the iterative nature of first release, testing if something's going to work, something's going to change, all those kinds of things. And so I think the burden of responsibility is shifting, right? So if you want the out-of-the-box intranet, you can just use it straight out of the cloud versus I actually go ahead and do the customization. And I think it's hard for companies to do that, right? Customers are used to having that power with Microsoft to say, hey, I want these features in there because I use them. Let me deal with the change, right? Let me deal with the risk of something breaking. And we do that on-prem all the time, right? We go up to a next version. We know that we're going to have a migration headache, at the end of one version, but we've made that as a conscious decision. I think rubber does meet the road when it comes to the cloud or the hybrid situation, right? And so I think that's the tension. So his question is how much risk and responsibility basically your IT department wants to bear when they're fulfilling their internal customer needs versus what Microsoft is trying to provide you from a customer functionality to change and break things if you choose to do so, right? It's your platform.
I think one of the tricky things around this, though, Naomi, is how would you know? If you're not reading every blog post that Microsoft puts out and every Facebook post that Vesa happens to post, I follow him assiduously because he knows a lot. But if you didn't know and you do some things out of that are in the UI that are why wouldn't they be acceptable? And then you get to that upgrade process and you end up having to call Microsoft and they say, well, you shouldn't have done that.
Yeah.
But it's part of the product. If we shouldn't have done it, then you should have fixed it. I think that's been my premise all along. If you give us a capability, it's got to work.
Yeah. Well, could be a good, if through first release they are adding all of this added value and features and, going through what could be interesting, at least for Office 365, is perhaps all of these things that are against the guideline or not following the best practices, however we want to call them. It could be interesting that if you click on Save Site as a template, perhaps there's some kind of warning. For our own product, Michael Svensson told us the same thing, right? You can delete the term store using our tool or the term group, but maybe there should be a warning that when you right-click delete, it doesn't just say delete, it says make sure that it's not being used somewhere in another site collection. So, it could be... Yeah.
Are you sure?
Right.
Are you really sure?
So that was the whole reason for the push. I mean, now getting into a little bit of the history, and Ben knows some of this too. Is but going back 5 years ago in the migration space, Microsoft was pushing all the migration ISVs to put that pre-migration analysis as a core part of it. To specifically because this, not just. So that you knew what was going to be a problem before you attempted to migrate and then can go and make changes or make decisions about what you don't do and don't migrate across. And that, still exists today. I look at some of this and having helped create it was part of the team, I use loosely, part of the team for what was MMS and then BPOS, which is the dedicated side of what is now Office 365. So I joined the team about 6 months, a year after it was spun out of IT. And the headache was that when you take all of these beautifully designed SharePoint environments, I say that with as much sarcasm as possible, into a managed environment, it's a nightmare for Microsoft to then go and manage that. So I understand them trying to protect what they then have to own. That's the reason for their shift. But I agree, Mark, with your point, is that because you can do it, and people are doing that, at least you need to be clear about, hey, here's what won't work in a cloud, a hosted version. Here's where you're going to run into problems, and make it easy to identify those things. But make it easier if I'm able to do these things on-prem and I'm going to upgrade to another on-prem, make it easier for me to move between those versions, support it within the product.
Right, which I think we're seeing a better pass at with 2016 from everything I've heard. I haven't had to do a upgrade or a migration, but I think that process is getting better as every 3 years we see it.
Yeah, but I don't think so. Yeah, if you're moving from 2003 or 2007 or even 2010 to 2016, it'll be much more painful than it is moving from 2013 to 2016 because they have been cleaning up that process and locking down some of those things. And I think going forward, by reducing the amount that you can go in and customize and providing more guidance and these patterns of practice and best practices out there, it's going to reduce the amount. But it's going to be a headache for people moving from those older versions, and I don't think there's any way around that, whether you're moving on-prem or to the cloud.
Just keeping your hands on or your head around what this guidance even is and how it shifts over time, I think is a huge task. I mean, you know, I always feel pretty badly for the SharePoint shops that are a person or two, because it's just impossible. I mean, we go to these conferences for a living practically, and we're barely able to keep up with what Microsoft is saying and what all the things are that they're suggesting or trying to keep us informed about. So, you know, these smaller shops who have plenty of other stuff to do, they're not going to see it. They're going to use the product the way it looks like the product should be used. So, you know, I don't know what the answer is. I wish that there was some smaller fire hose from which to get information on a just-in-time basis, but there's just too much of it. So there's really no answer to that. But, you know, one of the easiest ways around it would be not to let people do things that they shouldn't be doing. Now, turning that stuff off, like Naomi said, is going to cause huge problems, but at least making, you know, give us a message, give us, you know, send us an email that says, hey, did you know you have 14 site templates saved in your solution gallery? You might have problems with these. You might want to think about X, Y, and Z. The statements that say, oh, but that doesn't work and you shouldn't do it are actually sort of useless. What is it about it that doesn't work and why, so that we actually can make some good decisions? And building that into the product as a set of suggestions would be an awesome way to start to handle.
Yeah, great. I think the other aspect of it is maybe, you know, using something like the message center to help with the administrators having some knowledge of these things that they've even happened, right? So some of these choices could be at a user or a site collection level. And then you as the Office 365 or the SharePoint admin, you don't know that this choice has been made, right? But it's your problem in a year's time when you have to deal with it, right? So maybe, you know, giving them some notification about what's going on inside of their environment so that you know that these things are there, you know, that a customer has chosen to do this thing, which is, you know, fine, right? If you're big enough to break it, you're big enough to handle the consequences. But you have to know about those things too, and not be just suddenly finding out the day that you want to do migration or something else.
Well, I would say that, but that's kind of what the ISV ecosystem, you know, provides a lot of that capability.
Right.
So, I mean, are you guys saying, you know, that it should be built into the product? Because as you know, in many cases where partners are able to go and provide that capability, Microsoft just says, hey, look, it's not in the product. Why do we need to put it in the product? Partners have robust solutions that are on top of this. I mean, I know you've got the admin tools of ShareGate, you've got, you know, Metalogix and AvePoint and a bunch of other vendors that are out there to provide all different kinds of reporting and capability. They can give you real-time, you know, warnings if somebody goes and adds an unsupported web part. You get notified.
Yeah, I think it's just warning the customer as well. Yeah, it's warning the customer in the UI when they're making that choice, and then notifying the admin that it happened, right? So,
spoken as a vendor, eh, Christian?
Yeah, with no skin in the game on that area.
Yeah.
You know, I remember when the health rules came out in, was it SharePoint 2010?
2010, yeah.
I think it was. I had great hopes for that was going to be, you know, a set of rules that would actually be updated over time and give you things like, hey, somebody's been doing this kind of thing. You might want to go and check on it. But that sort of died a whimpering death. And,
yeah.
You know,
I came from a long, before I did SharePoint, I did a lot of, I'm not going to say the name of the product because I hate, but SCUM. But System Center Operations Manager, which before SCUM was called MUM, which is, let's not go there, but, you know, I did a lot of that. So when I saw that, you know, they brought in the health rules, I thought, interesting. I wonder if they took all of those, you know, monitors and agents that we had in SCUM for SharePoint, but like you said, it didn't really
Yeah, and of course by then as Joanne has just pointed out in chat, you know, it's sort of after the horses left the barn, right?
Yeah.
What we really want to do is try to give people guidance while they're trying to do something. So if I am sneaking around and typing in a URL that I shouldn't be typing, just say, hey, you know, maybe you shouldn't be doing that. But if it's in the UI, it ought to work, period. My opinion.
I agree.
All right. Move on to talk about the Office 365 CSMs and
This is my smooth process of switching over to the slides so people can see it for a second. Oh, yeah. So yeah, this was kind of, I don't know, Naomi, if you wanted to kind of kick things off. I mean, obviously I did some writing about it, but.
Sure. So this is the talk about the Office 365 customer success managers. And this is obviously a role that had come over from the Yammer acquisition. And the sort of the nature of customer success managers, basically folks that are helping you with your deployment of collaboration technologies and really bringing some, expertise to the game in terms of the change management, the community management, all of the functionality that's on there too. And so it wasn't just a technology role, it was definitely much more about community and culture and change inside of the organization. So that became broadened out from just Yammer to Office 365 generally, so all of the collaboration technologies in there. And Ben is right to wear a hard hat. It's very funny. So, God, I start spewing in a minute, Okay. And so when we think about that broadening of that role, it was sort of a free service in some ways, kind of free service that came with the clients, the largest clients who were implementing Office 365. And it was really around pushing some of the new metrics at Microsoft as a service because it was about active usage. So active usage of the services wasn't enough to just have licensed the services. They want to see active usage of those services and help you be successful internally. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, we just recently had this announcement where basically all of that customer success management organization was reduced in force en masse. So I think there's a couple of different things that have happened as part of that. One is obviously now there's a lot of talent available. So if you guys need somebody, change management, community management, there's a whole bunch of folks available and good to connect with them. The other aspect of it is looking at some of the other resources that Microsoft is giving you instead, right? They spend a lot of money developing the partner community in terms of trying to get training and other things as part of it. And that's been successful in some areas, not so successful in others. They've also put a lot of effort into the fast track .office.com service. So the fast track service has really been positioned as not just customer success, but helping you with technical success as well, and really making sure that your journey to the cloud is better. So they're doing lots of things as part of Fast Track. So one is migrating your email, right? They'll even migrate your email for you. They're going to be migrating files soon, all kinds of other stuff. So there's services, there's technical deployment, and there's also like a process workthrough that you can go through as part of the Fast Track process so that you can get your stakeholders and other input in there. So there are other resources there, but what you don't have anymore is this dedicated person-to-person organization, which felt very jarring in a predominantly community management kind of area. So,
but I think, and part of the problem is, I think people automatically jumped and said, well, Microsoft then doesn't think that role is important. I said, you know what, that's not the case. If you go and you talk with people in leadership positions there, I mean, they very much understand there is the need for this. However, I think it just realistically, I mean, you have, I don't know how many there were, 40, 50 worldwide. It was essentially for those accounts, it was a free resource to do that activity. It wasn't a cost-effective way of delivering that. It wasn't something that scaled. Certainly to scale that to all the customers worldwide who need it would be an enormous cost and headcount to be able to do that. If you could even find the people that are those type of people, because there's a lot of talent within that organization, I agree. So Microsoft is trying to scale that and to productize it, put the processes in place, put it in something that in a program where it can get out and make sense to more and more organizations. But where I think kind of the failure was, I'll put it in Microsoft terms, where the opportunity was for Microsoft was to better message this, that they believe in that role and that function. Because, look, my interest in this, working for a social collaboration ISV, is that type of role, whether it's Microsoft or internally or a consulting partner providing that is a critical role to the success of any collaboration platform. This goes back to, I believe, the fundamentals of failure of most technology, but certainly SharePoint and collaboration systems, knowledge management systems, is that if it's led as an IT initiative and deploy the technology and you get people on there and then that's it, it's going to fail. You need to have people, call them a CSM, customer success manager, a community manager, whatever you want to call it. You need that type of advocacy who's nurturing, that is growing and expanding that if you expect it to continue to be successful. You're going to have that initial excitement of the new technology, everybody's on board, and then it's going to rapidly trail off from there if you're not constantly educating, nurturing, advocating, evangelizing that internally. And that's what this role did. And I'll stop talking here, but it's a need for organizations to step up and to own and drive that piece.
Yeah, I think you're right on everything you're saying, of course, Christian, because I agree with everything you say. This absolutely has been the case for a lot of technologies since at least the mid-90s, where they're not sort of core mission critical systems. They're not the finance package. You have no choice about using the finance package. If you don't use it, you don't get your money for your budget, right? All that kind of nonsense. So where you have these systems that are meant to augment existing processes with a new knowledge management layer, or a new collaboration layer, or a new, whatever you want to call it these days, layer, they do need constant nurturing and growth and sort of stirring. It's just like a search service doesn't continue to work well unless you monitor how people are using it and try and make improvements to it. The having a person do that stuff is absolutely not something that scales. So from that perspective, that role was not going to, it just wasn't going to cut it. It was a bit of an abrupt way to go about it. And the real question in my mind, and having not looked at any of those fast track materials, I'm talking from no knowledge, but does it replace the kinds of knowledge that those people had and give it to not the IT people, but the people in the business who actually need to be able to shepherd these efforts going forward? If it does, then it is a step in the right direction. I think it's hard to read something and become one of those people. You have to be one of those people to some degree to start with. A community advocate, all that sort of stuff. It's a mindset. Some of the people who do that stuff are not like other people. Which I think is what you said, Christian. And I do mean that in a positive way. Again, from my KM days, there are some people who live and breathe this stuff, and there's some people who just don't quite get it. But if somebody who lives and breathes it is in the room, they can get on board with it. And so that's an important distinction, and I hope that the materials that Microsoft continues to put out to assist with this stuff is going to help fill those gaps.
That's, and I think this is kind of the core thing. I'll go back to kind of my project management days. No matter what project that I was going, whatever initiative I was driving, I would always seek out and try and find those the advocates, those stakeholders within the organizations which are so passionate about driving that. Because I knew that if I could get those people with passion, those advocates on board for the project, that they would help make my job easier, whatever it is that I was doing. And I saw that again and again and again. And that's just another, key aspect of this role, of the advocacy of this role. I know, Benjamin, if you have any thoughts on this.
None whatsoever. No, I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on social implementations and the impact on customer success managers for Yammer and all of that. It's just not my expertise.
Yes, but that's the other thing is I'm intentionally making this broader than Yammer, because I think Yammer is
for sure. No, I can apply that to anything.
Right. But it's
technology in an organization.
Right.
Exactly. It is a changing of the role, basically. I think, we've already said it, but having a 100% successful technical deployment is basically not a successful project, right? So the technology part, the more we move to cloud, the more we consume services, the more we have hybrid environments, the technology part of it, even though, as IT folks, we're considering that to be a success, right? Deploying it to 1,000 users, right? That's just your baseline, right? You're just the electrical power running in the building and nobody cares until it's down kind of deal, right? So the issue is, how do you make those things sustainable? How do you drive the adoption? And it's the same for any of the Office 365 collaboration technologies. It's not just Yammer, right? It's any part of Office 365. If you're trying to get people to use Power BI, it's the same issue, right? So these things are all about this change in what's happening with technology. It is that enablement. And the enablement is about people and behaviors and community and change management and all this stuff that has nothing to do with IT, right? Or traditional IT. And I think that's what this is symptomatic of. I do think this announcement was coupled with another announcement that kind of got snowed under because of all this fallout from the CSM announcement. But the fact that Office 365 is switching on Yammer by default now in new tenants, right? So it will be on by default. So that need for scale that Christian was talking about earlier, that massive scaling that is going to be needed because everybody will have it on by default. So there's no way that you could ever assign a customer success manager to every small organization, every large organization across the world. So having some resources there. Now, whether people have understood that there's messaging available and that there's resources available and that there's a customized process that you can walk through as part of Fast Track, I'm not sure people have
I have no idea.
Yeah, so that's the issue. I think the disconnect is on the communication.
I thought Fast Track was for migrations of Exchange and SharePoint.
Yeah, that's what it used to be. So they've built it out a lot over the last 18 months or so.
Very interesting.
And so it's this process that you walk through, and it's you sign into the Fast Track portal, and you basically walk through these different steps, and you get resources along the way. And you sort of try to customize it for your organization. And to Mark's point, you can invite in the business folks to say who needs to fill out these kind of checklists and these kinds of parts of the process.
Very nice.
You can invite these stakeholders. The question is, though, as an organization, who's going to drive that, right? Because you need somebody to make you accountable. Having all the process, having all the resources doesn't mean you're going to do it, right?
That's good for anything, right? You always need somebody accountable for whatever project, task. You can't, that's regardless of even technology. It's in every business for everything.
Right.
And hey, Naomi, it's not just a matter that it's enabled, it's by default on. Didn't they also expand the number of the licenses that Yammer is now free within?
Yes. Yeah, within certain plans, right?
And I think we're going to see that in the future, but, so we had a debate already on this, but my opinion is, as Yammer gets, it moved into the data centers, it's now certified in all things. Now it's getting ready to get, really integrated in the other pieces, right? Like groups for Office 365 growing and maturing. So if in the future, for example, when you launch a new team site, we don't have the old social feed anymore, we might want a conversation feed. And it's funny because we were looking at a customer that's on Office 365 here in Montreal, a couple thousands of licenses, some E1, some kiosks, and they wanted to find a way, what is a way for teams to be able to start a site quickly, to put documents and work in it. In my head, I was like, groups, but they're not ready for groups and how groups is today. But I think it's sometimes people want to, and what better way to have what existing technology, which is Yammer, right, to have that in the and that's what we did. We create, it's manual at the moment, we go create a Yammer group, we take the embed code, and we go put it in the brand new SharePoint team site that we built for them. They have no idea Yammer as a product exists or how it works. They just know they have conversations where they have their files that they work on, and that solves their problem. So the fact that Yammer is on by default, I think is probably, it shows where some of the things are headed, that finally we're going to see more complete integrations with the rest of the product suite, especially SharePoint. I'm hoping, I have no idea, this is honestly, it's not even NDA stuff, I have no idea. It's just that if it's on by default, it means they need it for everyone. Mm-hmm. Not necessarily that they want to push the product for everyone, but they may just
I think it's the idea of having this social backbone, whether it's served with the group's API generally, whether it's Yammer, that you have that as a user experience, whether you use Office 365, you use Outlook groups, It's like whether you're, whichever one you want to consume, you can do that. And I think we're seeing, you know, like you said, massive things around compliance, right? Having HIPAA compliance in Yammer, it's huge, right? Having model clauses, you know, right out there. And then you've got other aspects of it like the unified ID, which, you know, across Office 365, powering that by Azure AD, there's all kinds of cool stuff going on. So there's a lot of work going on. It doesn't seem like it on the interface, right? And people complaining and things are not updating and there's all this. I totally get it, But there is a lot of stuff going on back there in terms of what's going on with Office 365 groups and making that all mesh together. I did notice there was a news thing that we just got posted.
Yeah, I just saw the auditing and reporting and...
What did I miss?
You can upload files up to 10 gigabytes, past 10, what was it? There's a new announcement on blogs.office while we were talking.
That's right, while we were talking. So I'm very excited. I know, very excited, 10 gigabytes. And
let's all go look.
there's
Crash their servers.
I'm excited, of course, about Compliance Center because now we're going to get audit reports from OneDrive and SharePoint and Compliance Center. Woo! So, yes, and 11 terabyte, the terabyte limits too. So anyway, I think that's pretty awesome. So we'll do that for the next show.
It's our mixed nuts.
Yeah, so are there any other, I mean, you kind of stole the thunder talking about other stuff within the topics that, you know, but anything else that's come up in the last couple of weeks that you guys want to mention before
I think it's this blog post just now that got released. That's our main...
That's right. It's really cool. It's a lot of new things in there. I haven't had time to read it all, but I guess the auditing is part of it. That's really
quickly, I'm going to go over it. I have auditing and reporting across numerous users and admin activities. So basically, you can say start recording activities for a certain user. It's going to tell you for that user what they checked out, what they copied, what they moved, what they modified, and things like that. There's a lot of reports. It's all in the Compliance Center. It uses obviously the Office 5 Management API. You can export that into CSV. Upload larger files up to 10 gigabytes. So that's it's talking about SharePoint team sites, Office 365 groups, which is SharePoint team sites, OneDrive for Business, document library, which is SharePoint. So essentially files up to 10 gigabytes. A larger example of a large CAD file. So they have a CAD drawing in a document library as an example. 1 terabyte additional space for overall pooled SharePoint online storage allocation. Wow. Yeah. And then they talked about the sites, you know, when you click on sites and you can see all the sites that you belong to. So there's a refresh on that page. They're modernizing the UX. I think we're going to hear the word modernize quite often.
That was on my prediction list. Remember, using modern too many times.
Not the other modern, this modern, right?
This modern, yeah. And finally, Exchange Web Services and Exchange Online Protection, which I don't know.
You remember the pace of change, one of these that we did, I don't know, 6 months ago. I think people are still having a tough time keeping their head around, you know, all these changes that are coming.
But I think it's slowed down a little bit and it's better communicated, and I like the pace.
Yeah.
Well, you do. It's interesting, you know, like having Yammer turned on by default. I know I have 2 specific clients I can think of who are going to be terrified by that. I haven't talked to them about it because I haven't done work with them for a while, but you know, there are a lot of these changes that as they come along, people are going to have to really adjust in different ways than they expected.
Absolutely.
You know, the auditing thing is probably going to help those people because that's one of the reasons they were freaking out.
Yeah.
What if somebody says something in Yammer that isn't true?
No, I know.
That's a fun conversation.
It doesn't happen though, Mark.
I know. No, I never have it.
I know. Interesting. We'll have a whole show about that sometime. It was exciting. The Compliance Center getting the updates is incredible. I know we did our last show on that stuff too. But I do think that is getting better. And I do think the Message Center, they have been doing a much better job of the Message Center. So if you haven't looked at it in the last few months or so, before it was very reactive and it was hit or miss whether you're getting the messages on the Message Center. But I do think it is much better now. So when you go to Office 365 and you log in as an admin, you'll see some of these messages that are important. And there is a better cadence and a better understanding about what they should be communicating earlier rather than later, and what you should do about it, if it's just information or you should do something, etc. So they are getting much better about that communication.
I still hope that they come up with a way to move that information out to the end users, though. You know, the Message Center is really for
there is an RSS feed that you can look at too. So I mean, you know, there are
but actually in the UI, right? So you go to the sites page and you say, wait a minute, this doesn't look right. Well, there's no way to know why it doesn't look right. So having something, and I think
more granular for.
I know that they put some of this actually into the administrative pages more than the end user pages, where it's, take a look at this, and here's a pointer over here, and this thing is a new blah blah blah. That's really helpful stuff for end users, and I hope that this stuff filters out there too.
Great. All right.
Well, cool. Well, I think we're at a wrap here. We're at close to the top of the hour here. Of course, if you'd like to keep chatting about these topics, you can reach out to us individually. Of course, on Twitter, you can use the hashtag of CollabTalk. Still haven't selected a topic for this month's Tweet Jam, but there will be a Tweet Jam happening at the end of the month as well. Probably on, as I usually do, on one of the topics that we cover here, and we go a little more in depth. But here's our contact information. You can find us online. And the next episode, we'll be back with you doing a live show on March 16th. So all we ask is that you get 10 to 20 of your friends to also register and to show up. That's it. So it's with that.
On what you'd like us to cover too, right? We'd love to hear from folks on topics that you'd like us to cover.
Definitely. So we're doing that planning now this week. So if you have a topic that you'd like us to cover, get more in depth on, then you can tweet us or email us, and we'll respond. So thank you, everybody. Mark, Naomi, Benjamin.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks a lot, Lyman.
Thanks.
Thanks, Lyman.
Thank you, Lyman.